I was sitting in my rocking chair, cradling my 3-week-old daughter Sarah against my chest, when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. The first call came from my former workplace at 7 in the morning, then another. By the third ring, panic crept into my voice as I answered. The Pentagon auditor has just asked where the named security officer with top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearance is for the $400 million defense contract review. My program director, Janet, pointed to my empty desk and said I was on maternity leave. The auditor's response froze the entire room completely. My name is Kathy, and 4 years ago I thought I had landed my dream job at Meridian Defense Solutions. Fresh out of college with a degree in cybersecurity, I had worked tirelessly to earn my top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearance. The background investigation took 18 months of my life. Federal agents interviewed my high school teachers, college roommates, and even my neighbors from when I was 12 years old. They scrutinized every address I had ever lived at, every job I had held, every person I had dated. The process was exhausting, invasive, but absolutely necessary for national security. When I finally received my clearance, I felt like I had joined an exclusive club. Only a small percentage of Americans hold this level of security clearance, and even fewer are women in their 20s. Meridian Defense Solutions recruited me specifically because they needed someone with my credentials to handle their most sensitive contracts. The Aegis Naval Defense System contract was their crown jewel worth $400 million over 5 years. As the sole named security officer, I was responsible for ensuring that every person who touched classified documents had proper clearance, that all protocols were followed to the letter, and that our security procedures met federal standards. For 3.5 years, I threw myself into the work. I created comprehensive security protocols, trained personnel on classified document handling, and built relationships with our Pentagon liaisons. My supervisor reviews were stellar. Janet Morrison, our program director, frequently praised my attention to detail and professionalism. When Tom Chen, our primary Pentagon contact, visited for quarterly reviews, he always specifically complimented our security operations. When my husband Mark and I decided to start a family, I was nervous about telling my employer. Defense contracting is still very much a male-dominated field, and I had heard whispered stories about women whose careers stalled after having children. But when I announced my pregnancy 6 months ago, the response seemed genuinely supportive. Janet congratulated me warmly. Brad Walsh from Human Resources assured me that my position would be protected under the Family and Medical Leave Act, and my colleagues threw me a beautiful baby shower in the conference room. But things began to shift subtly around my 7th month of pregnancy. The changes were so gradual that I initially dismissed them as my own paranoia. Janet started excluding me from certain meetings, claiming they were just routine administrative discussions that would bore me. Brad began asking pointed questions about my childcare plans and whether I had considered the challenges of balancing motherhood with high security work. Derek Palmer, a junior analyst who had been with the company for only 8 months, suddenly started attending security briefings that had previously been my exclusive responsibility. The breaking point came 3 months before my due date during what I thought would be a routine check-in meeting. Janet and Brad called me into the conference room with its panoramic view of the Potomac River. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Janet's demeanor was different than usual, more formal and distant. She spoke carefully as if each word had been rehearsed. She began by acknowledging my excellent work over the years, but then her tone shifted. She suggested that perhaps I should consider whether returning to such a demanding position after having a baby was realistic. Brad chimed in with statistics about new mothers and workplace stress, speaking as if my decision to have a child was somehow a betrayal of my professional commitments. Janet then dropped the bombshell that would change everything. She told me they were concerned about continuity on the Aegis project. Defense work, she explained, required absolute reliability and round-the-clock availability. When I pointed out that maternity leave is temporary and legally protected, her response chilled me. She said that while they would certainly comply with all legal requirements, they had to think about what was best for the company and the contract. Maybe she suggested it would be better for everyone if I considered stepping back permanently. After all, defense work really was not compatible with motherhood. I sat there stunned, my hands instinctively moving to protect my growing belly. This woman who had mentored me, who had celebrated my achievements, was essentially telling me that becoming a mother made me unfit for the career I had worked so hard to build. When I asked about my clearance and the specialized knowledge I brought to the position, Brad dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand. They had already begun cross-training other personnel, he said. Derek Palmer was showing remarkable aptitude for security work. The mention of Derek sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Derek was smart and eager, but he had only a secret clearance, not the top-secret sensitive compartmented information level required for the Aegis project. When I pointed this out, Janet assured me that his upgrade was already in progress. Everything was being handled properly, she said, though her eyes did not meet mine when she spoke. As I drove home that evening, my mind raced through the implications of what I had just heard. Derek's clearance upgrade should take at least a year, possibly longer. The background investigation for top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearance is incredibly thorough and cannot be rushed without compromising security. For them to suggest he could simply step into my role implied either gross incompetence or something far more sinister. That night, I lay awake next to Mark, staring at the ceiling and feeling my baby kick as if she too sensed something was wrong. I had dedicated years of my life to protecting national security, following every regulation and protocol to the letter. The idea that my employer might be cutting corners on security clearances made my stomach churn. But I was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and facing the biggest life change I had ever experienced. I convinced myself that surely I was overreacting, that Janet and Brad knew what they were doing, that Derek's clearance must be legitimate. I decided to focus on preparing for motherhood and trust that everything would work out. It was a decision I would soon regret, as I discovered that Derek's clearance was not just questionable, but completely fraudulent, and the conspiracy went much deeper than I could have imagined. The first 2 weeks at home with baby Sarah were a whirlwind of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the overwhelming love that comes with holding your newborn child. Mark had taken time off from his job at the accounting firm to help during those crucial early days, and we were slowly finding our rhythm as new parents. Sarah was a beautiful baby with dark hair like mine, and Mark's gentle disposition. During those quiet midnight feedings, I found myself thinking less and less about work and more about the tiny person who had completely transformed my world. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Mark had returned to work the day before, and I was enjoying a rare moment of peace while Sarah napped when the doorbell rang. Standing on my front porch was Lisa Rodriguez, a former colleague who had left Meridian 6 months earlier. Lisa and I had worked closely together on several projects, and I had been sorry to see her go. She had claimed she was leaving for better opportunities, but something about her departure had always felt abrupt and unexplained. Lisa looked nervous as I invited her in for coffee, glancing around as if she expected to be followed. She admired Sarah briefly, but I could tell she had something important on her mind. After settling into my living room, she took a deep breath and asked if I knew why she had really left Meridian. When I repeated what I had been told about better opportunities elsewhere, she shook her head grimly. The truth, Lisa explained, was far more troubling. She had been forced out after questioning irregularities in security clearance documentation. About 8 months ago, she had noticed that several new hires seemed to have obtained high-level clearances unusually quickly. When she brought her concerns to Janet, she was told to mind her own business and focus on her assigned duties. But Lisa could not shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Her suspicions were confirmed when she accidentally discovered a file cabinet in Janet's office that contained what appeared to be falsified clearance documents. The background investigation reports looked official, but Lisa recognized several inconsistencies that suggested they were fabricated. When she tried to verify the information through proper channels, she was blocked at every turn. Janet accused her of being paranoid and disruptive, and within 2 weeks, Lisa found herself facing a hostile work environment that made her position untenable. As Lisa spoke, I felt a growing sense of dread. She pulled out a folder she had brought with her containing photocopied documents she had managed to save before her departure. The papers showed Derek Palmer's alleged top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearance approval dated just 6 weeks after his initial application. Lisa pointed out that this timeline was impossible under legitimate circumstances. The standard process takes 12 to 18 months minimum, with some cases extending even longer. But Derek's case was not an isolated incident. Lisa showed me similar documentation for 3 other employees who had received questionable clearances for the Aegis project. Each had been approved in time frames that defied federal regulations. The background investigation reports all came from the same private investigation company, Potomac Security Services, which I had never heard of despite years in the field. Lisa's most disturbing revelation was about the financial aspect of the fraud. She had discovered that Janet was billing the Pentagon premium rates for a full security team with proper top-secret sensitive compartmented information clearances, while actually employing people with no clearances or falsified credentials. The difference in billing rates was substantial. Properly cleared personnel command much higher salaries and project fees, meaning Meridian was essentially stealing money from the federal government while compromising national security. When Lisa researched Potomac Security Services, she discovered that the company was owned by Robert Morrison, who shared a last name with our program director. Further investigation revealed that Robert was actually Janet's brother-in-law, making the entire clearance approval process an elaborate family fraud scheme. They were essentially printing fake security clearances and selling them to the highest bidder. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not only was my employer defrauding the government, but they were also compromising classified defense projects that could affect the safety of American military personnel. The Aegis naval defense system was designed to protect our ships from incoming missiles. If uncleared personnel had access to its specifications, that information could potentially reach foreign adversaries. Lisa explained that after she left Meridian, she had continued gathering information, hoping to find someone brave enough to expose the conspiracy. She had chosen to approach me because of my reputation for integrity and my deep understanding of security protocols. But she also brought devastating news about my own situation. According to Lisa's sources still inside the company, Janet had been telling Pentagon officials and other stakeholders that I had resigned due to family priorities. My maternity leave was being portrayed as a voluntary departure from the defense industry entirely. Even worse, Janet was already in the process of permanently eliminating the properly cleared security officer position from the Aegis project, claiming that enhanced automation and streamlined procedures made such oversight unnecessary. I felt physically sick as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Not only were they stealing my job while I was on legally protected leave, but they were also using my absence to implement a fraudulent security system that could endanger national defense. Janet was betting that I would be too focused on my new baby to notice or care about what was happening at work. Lisa urged me to take action quickly. The Pentagon conducts quarterly reviews of major defense contracts, and the next one was scheduled for the following week. If the fraud was not exposed soon, it would become even more entrenched and harder to prove. She offered to testify about what she had witnessed, but she warned me that fighting back would be dangerous. Janet had already demonstrated her willingness to destroy careers to protect her scheme. After Lisa left, I spent the rest of the day researching federal whistleblower protections and trying to understand my legal options. That evening, when Mark came home from work, I shared everything Lisa had told me. His initial reaction was concern for our family's financial security, but as I explained the national security implications, he understood that this was bigger than just my career. The next morning, I decided to test Lisa's claims by trying to access my work email and building security systems. To my shock and horror, I discovered that all my access had been terminated. My company email bounced back messages saying the account no longer existed. My building keycard was deactivated. According to Meridian Systems, I was no longer an employee even though I was supposed to be on protected maternity leave with guaranteed job restoration. It was then that I realized Janet had not just betrayed me professionally, but had also violated federal labor laws. The Family and Medical Leave Act specifically prohibits employers from retaliating against employees who take protected leave. By terminating my access and spreading false information about my voluntary resignation, Janet had committed multiple federal crimes. As I held Sarah that night, I made a decision that would change all our lives. I was not going to let this fraud continue. My daughter deserved to grow up in a country where people stood up for what was right, where national security was not sold to the highest bidder, and where working mothers were protected by law. The fight ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but I knew I had no choice but to expose the truth. The next morning brought a crushing realization of just how deep the deception ran. I started by trying to contact Tom Chen, our primary Pentagon liaison, hoping to clarify my employment status and raise concerns about the security irregularities Lisa had described. When I finally reached him by phone, his confusion was immediate and troubling. Tom told me he had received official notification from Meridian 3 days earlier, stating that I had voluntarily resigned from my position to focus on raising my family. He expressed surprise at hearing from me and assumed I was calling to say goodbye. The casual way Tom accepted this fabricated story revealed how skillfully Janet had orchestrated my removal. She had not simply terminated my access systems, she had systematically erased my professional existence and replaced it with a narrative that painted me as a woman who had chosen motherhood over career advancement. In the male-dominated world of defense contracting, this story was unfortunately believable enough that nobody had questioned it. Realizing I needed legal representation, I made an appointment with Amanda Foster, an employment attorney who specialized in federal workplace discrimination and whistleblower cases. Amanda's office was located in downtown Washington, in a building that housed several law firms focused on government accountability. Her credentials were impressive, with 20 years of experience fighting wrongful termination and retaliation cases against federal contractors. Amanda listened carefully as I explained my situation, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about timelines and documentation. Her expression grew increasingly serious as I described the security clearance fraud and the systematic elimination of my position during legally protected maternity leave. When I finished my account, Amanda leaned back in her leather chair and exhaled slowly. What I had described, she explained, violated multiple federal statutes. The Family and Medical Leave Act prohibits exactly the kind of retaliation I was experiencing. Defrauding the federal government through falsified security clearances constituted multiple felonies. But Amanda's investigation over the following days would reveal that the corruption extended far beyond what I had initially understood. Amanda's paralegal staff began pulling public records and conducting background checks on key players in the scheme. What they discovered painted a picture of systematic fraud that had been operating for years. Meridian Defense Solutions had been awarded numerous federal contracts based on their claimed security capabilities that existed only on falsified paperwork. The financial scope was staggering. Amanda's analysis of federal contracting databases showed that Meridian had received over $200 million in contracts over the past 3 years, all requiring high-level security clearances that many of their personnel did not actually possess. The premium rates they charged for cleared personnel versus standard employees represented tens of millions in fraudulent billing. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that this was not a recent development. Amanda found evidence that Janet had been systematically targeting women employees who might pose a threat to her operation. Over the past 2 years, 4 other women in security-sensitive positions had been terminated or forced to resign during or immediately after maternity leave. Each termination had been carefully orchestrated to appear voluntary, and each had eliminated someone with legitimate clearances who might have exposed the fraud. The pattern was unmistakable once Amanda laid it out chronologically. Janet would identify women in critical security positions who were pregnant or planning families. She would then begin a gradual campaign of exclusion and undermining, making their work environments increasingly hostile. When they went on maternity leave, their positions would be eliminated or filled with fraudulently cleared personnel, and false narratives about voluntary resignation would be spread throughout the company and to federal contacts. Amanda also discovered disturbing financial connections that expanded the conspiracy beyond just Meridian. Bank records showed regular payments from Janet's personal accounts to various family members, including her brother-in-law Robert Morrison, who owned Potomac Security Services. But the money trail did not stop there. Payments had also been made to Timothy Morrison, Robert's son, who worked as a clerk in the federal office responsible for processing security clearance applications. The Morrison family had essentially created a clearance mill, with Timothy providing inside information about legitimate applications, Robert creating falsified background investigations, and Janet implementing the fraudulent credentials within Meridian's operations. They had corrupted the entire system from application to implementation, turning national security clearances into a family business. As Amanda's investigation deepened, we discovered that Derek Palmer was not just a convenient hire, but actually Janet's nephew, the son of her sister Margaret. His rapid promotion within the company and assignment to high-security projects made perfect sense once this family connection was revealed. Derek had been brought in specifically to replace me, with his fraudulent clearance serving as the foundation for eliminating legitimate security oversight entirely. But the most shocking discovery came when Amanda's investigator found evidence that someone inside the company had been systematically documenting the fraud for months. Computer records showed that extensive files had been saved and copied, including recorded phone conversations, saved email chains, and photographed documents. Someone with administrative access had been building a comprehensive case against Janet's operation. When Amanda traced the digital fingerprints, the trail led to Grace Thompson, Janet's own executive assistant. Grace had been with the company for 15 years, starting as a receptionist and working her way up to a position of trust and access. Her computer logs showed months of after-hours activity, carefully copying and organizing evidence of the fraud. She had apparently been waiting for the right moment or the right person to share what she had discovered. Amanda arranged a discreet meeting with Grace at a small restaurant in Arlington, away from the office where we might be observed. Grace was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to hold years of accumulated secrets. When Amanda explained my situation, Grace's relief was palpable. Grace told us that she had been horrified when she first understood what Janet was doing, but she had felt powerless to act. As a single mother with college-aged children, she could not afford to lose her job by challenging her powerful supervisor. But she had also known that her silence made her complicit in crimes that threatened national security. The evidence Grace had compiled was comprehensive and damning. She had recorded conversations where Janet explicitly discussed falsifying clearances and eliminating legitimate security officers. She had saved email chains showing coordination with family members to create fraudulent background investigations. She had photographed financial documents showing the fraudulent billing schemes, but Grace's most devastating revelation was yet to come. She explained that Janet was planning to frame me for the entire operation, claiming that I had forged my own clearance years earlier and that my termination was actually the result of discovering my own fraud. Janet intended to present this fabricated narrative to Pentagon auditors, using my maternity leave absence as evidence that I had fled when the investigation began. The sophistication of this frame-up attempt was breathtaking. Janet had already begun seeding false information in my personnel file, backdating documents to suggest irregularities in my original clearance application. She was preparing to sacrifice me to protect herself and the broader conspiracy, betting that a new mother would be too overwhelmed to mount an effective defense. As I listened to Grace's account, I felt a rage building inside me that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. These people had not just stolen my job or even just defrauded the government. They were planning to destroy my reputation and potentially send me to federal prison to cover up their own crimes. They had calculated that I would be too vulnerable as a new mother to fight back effectively, but they had underestimated something fundamental about maternal instincts. The same protective drive that made me want to shield my daughter from harm also made me determined to protect other families from the consequences of compromised national security. If foreign adversaries gained access to classified defense information because of this fraud, American military personnel could die. That was unacceptable. Grace agreed to continue cooperating with our investigation, but she warned us that time was running short. The Pentagon's quarterly review was scheduled for the following week, and Janet was planning to use that meeting to officially present her fabricated evidence against me. We had less than 7 days to expose the truth before Janet's conspiracy could succeed. That night, as I fed Sarah and watched her peaceful sleeping face, I made a promise to my daughter and to myself. I would not let these criminals succeed. No matter how powerful they seemed or how carefully they had planned their deception, I would find a way to expose the truth and protect the national security systems I had sworn to defend. The next morning, I called Amanda with a determination that surprised even me. I told her I was ready to take on Janet's conspiracy directly, regardless of the personal cost. Amanda warned me about the risks, explaining that fighting federal contractors with deep political connections could be career-ending and financially devastating. But when I described my fear that compromised defense systems could cost American lives, she understood that this was about more than just my job. Amanda arranged an emergency meeting with Grace and Lisa at her law office for that afternoon. The 3 women who joined me in that conference room represented years of accumulated evidence and shared determination to expose the truth. Grace brought several boxes of documents she had secretly copied over the past months. Lisa provided detailed analysis of the security protocol violations she had witnessed. Together, we began assembling a case that would ultimately bring down Janet's entire operation. The evidence was overwhelming once we organized it systematically. Grace's recordings captured Janet explicitly discussing the falsification of security clearances and the systematic elimination of legitimate security officers. One particularly damning conversation revealed Janet laughing about how easy it was to fool Pentagon auditors who were too busy to verify every credential thoroughly. Lisa's technical analysis showed clear violations of federal security protocols across multiple projects. The timeline inconsistencies in Derek's clearance approval were just the tip of the iceberg. We found evidence of at least 12 other employees with questionable or completely fabricated clearances working on classified projects. The scope of the security compromise was staggering. Amanda explained that we had enough evidence to file both civil and criminal complaints, but she recommended approaching the Pentagon Inspector General's office first. Military investigators would understand the national security implications better than civilian prosecutors, and they had broader authority to investigate defense contractor fraud. That evening, Amanda contacted Captain Patricia Williams, a former Air Force officer who now worked as a senior investigator for the Pentagon Inspector General. Captain Williams had built a reputation for aggressively pursuing contractor fraud cases, and Amanda believed she would take our concerns seriously. The meeting was scheduled for the following day at the Pentagon Inspector General's offices in Arlington. As I prepared for this crucial meeting, I realized that everything depended on convincing Captain Williams that our allegations were credible and urgent. Janet's quarterly review with Pentagon auditors was now just 5 days away. Captain Williams was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with short brown hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. Her office was spartanly decorated with military commendations and photographs of aircraft carrier operations. When Amanda introduced me and began explaining our situation, Captain Williams listened with focused attention, occasionally asking sharp questions about specific details. The moment that changed everything came when I showed Captain Williams Derek's falsified clearance documentation alongside the standard timeline for legitimate top-secret sensitive compartmented information approvals. Her expression shifted from professional skepticism to genuine alarm as she realized the implications of what we were describing. Captain Williams explained that security clearance fraud was one of the most serious crimes in her jurisdiction, potentially carrying decades in federal prison. But the systematic nature of Janet's operation elevated it to a national security emergency. If foreign intelligence services had identified and exploited these vulnerabilities, classified information could already be compromised. Grace's recorded conversations provided the smoking gun that Captain Williams needed to launch an immediate investigation. In one recording, Janet could be heard discussing specific classified projects by name, while explicitly acknowledging that the personnel working on them lacked proper clearances. This was direct evidence of willful security violations that could endanger military operations. But Captain Williams had even more disturbing news for us. She explained that our investigation had uncovered connections to a broader pattern of defense contractor fraud that her office had been tracking for months. Intelligence reports suggested that foreign adversaries were systematically targeting companies with weak security practices, and several defense contractors had recently reported suspicious attempts to recruit their employees. The timing of our disclosure could not have been more critical. Captain Williams revealed that the FBI had been investigating unusual patterns in classified information leaks, and several of those leaks had been traced back to projects involving companies with questionable security clearance practices. Our evidence might provide the key to understanding how foreign intelligence services had penetrated American defense systems. Captain Williams made the decision to launch an immediate federal investigation, but she needed our continued cooperation to gather additional evidence before Janet could destroy records or flee. She asked if I would be willing to wear a recording device and confront Janet directly, gathering final evidence that could be used in court. The request terrified me, but I understood its importance. Captain Williams explained that recorded conversations would provide irrefutable evidence of Janet's intent to commit fraud and her knowledge of the security violations. Without this direct evidence, Janet could claim ignorance or blame subordinates for any irregularities that were discovered. Amanda worried about the legal and physical risks of having me directly confront someone who had already demonstrated willingness to destroy careers and potentially commit federal crimes. But Captain Williams assured us that I would have full federal protection throughout the operation, with agents monitoring the situation and ready to intervene if necessary. Grace volunteered to help coordinate the confrontation by ensuring that Janet would be alone in her office during a specific time window. She would also position herself to witness the conversation and provide backup recordings in case my equipment malfunctioned. As we planned the operation, Captain Williams shared additional intelligence that made our mission even more urgent. Her investigation had uncovered evidence that Janet's conspiracy was connected to at least 3 other defense contractors using identical fraud techniques. The total scope of the financial theft could exceed $1 billion, and the security compromises might affect dozens of classified projects. The revelation that this was part of a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy with national security implications transformed my understanding of what we were fighting. This was not just about my wrongful termination or even Meridian's fraud. We were potentially exposing a systematic attack on American defense capabilities by criminal networks that might be working with foreign adversaries. Captain Williams explained that successful prosecution would require evidence of intent, knowledge, and coordination. My confrontation with Janet would need to elicit admissions about her awareness of the fraud, her deliberate violation of security protocols, and her coordination with family members to create the falsified clearances. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but I thought about Sarah sleeping peacefully at home, unaware that her mother was preparing to take on criminals who threatened the security of the nation she would grow up in. Every American family deserved the protection that strong national defense provided, and I would not let Janet's greed compromise that security. That night, Mark held me as I explained what I was planning to do. He was frightened for my safety and worried about the potential consequences for our family, but he also understood that some fights are too important to avoid. He promised to support whatever decision I made, trusting my judgment about the risks and necessity of exposing the truth. As I prepared for what would be the most dangerous conversation of my life, I reflected on how much had changed since that first phone call 3 weeks earlier. I had gone from a new mother focused on caring for my baby to a federal whistleblower preparing to take down a criminal conspiracy that threatened national security. The transformation had been driven by a simple realization that some things are more important than personal comfort or safety. My daughter would inherit the world that my generation's choices created. I wanted her to inherit a country where integrity mattered, where criminals faced consequences for their actions, and where ordinary people had the courage to stand up for what was right. Tomorrow, I would walk into Janet's office wearing a recording device and carrying the hopes of everyone who had been victimized by her fraud. The conversation would determine whether justice prevailed or whether criminal conspiracy succeeded in destroying the evidence and the witnesses who threatened to expose it. I woke up that Thursday morning with my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would wake Sarah. Mark had already left for work, kissing me goodbye with an intensity that suggested he understood this might be the most dangerous day of my life. As I fed Sarah her morning bottle, I tried to project calm confidence, but my hands trembled slightly as I held her. Captain Williams had provided me with a sophisticated recording device that looked like an ordinary pen, along with backup audio equipment embedded in my purse. The technology was impressive, but I knew that all the equipment in the world would not help if Janet became suspicious or refused to incriminate herself in conversation. Grace had confirmed that Janet would be alone in her office between 10 and 11 that morning, with Derek scheduled to be off-site at a client meeting and Brad attending a human resources conference downtown. The timing was perfect for a private confrontation without witnesses who might complicate the situation. I dressed carefully in one of my pre-pregnancy business suits, wanting to project professional authority despite having been away from the office for 3 weeks. Looking in the mirror, I was struck by how much I had changed since my last day at work. Motherhood had added a strength to my features that had not been there before, a determination born of protective instincts that Janet had seriously underestimated. The drive to Meridian's office building felt surreal, like returning to a former life that no longer fit who I had become. I parked in my old spot, noting that my name had already been removed from the reserved parking sign. The small detail reinforced how thoroughly Janet had erased my professional existence while I was on legally protected leave. Sarah was with me in her carrier, providing perfect cover for my unexpected visit. New mothers frequently brought their babies to workplaces for brief visits, and her presence would make the encounter seem social rather than confrontational. Captain Williams had agreed that including Sarah would make Janet more likely to speak freely, assuming that a new mother posed no serious threat to her operation. The security guard in the lobby greeted me warmly, expressing delight at seeing Sarah and asking about my maternity leave. His genuine pleasure at my visit contrasted sharply with the deception I knew was occurring on the upper floors. When he asked if I was returning to work soon, I simply smiled and said I was still deciding about my future plans. The elevator ride to the 15th floor seemed to take forever, giving me too much time to consider everything that could go wrong. If Janet suspected I was recording our conversation, she could have me arrested for industrial espionage. If she realized the scope of my knowledge about her fraud, she might become desperate enough to take extreme measures to protect herself. But as I looked down at Sarah sleeping peacefully in her carrier, my resolve strengthened. This was not just about exposing Janet's crimes, but about protecting the country my daughter would inherit. If compromised defense systems led to American casualties in some future conflict, I would never forgive myself for having the opportunity to prevent it and choosing safety instead. The office environment felt different than I remembered, charged with an undercurrent of tension that I had not noticed before my maternity leave. Several colleagues greeted me enthusiastically, expressing surprise at seeing me and admiring Sarah. But I also noticed meaningful glances between certain employees suggesting that rumors about my employment status were already circulating. Derek Palmer was supposed to be at an off-site meeting, but I spotted him near the coffee station looking nervous and out of place. When our eyes met across the office, his face went pale, and he quickly retreated toward the men's restroom. His reaction confirmed that he knew exactly why his fraudulent clearance was a problem, and understood that my presence threatened the entire scheme. Grace appeared at my elbow with perfect timing, expressing delight at seeing Sarah while quietly confirming that Janet was alone in her office. Grace's eyes conveyed both encouragement and concern as she wished me luck with what everyone assumed was a casual maternity leave visit. Janet's office door was open, and I could see her sitting at her desk reviewing what appeared to be financial documents. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment her expression revealed genuine surprise before quickly shifting to forced pleasantness. Her smile was too bright, her voice too enthusiastic, as she welcomed me back and complimented Sarah's beauty. I entered her office with Sarah's carrier closing the door behind me, as if seeking privacy for our conversation about my future plans. Janet's eyes followed my movements, and I could see her calculating the implications of my unexpected visit. The recording device in my purse was already activated, capturing every word of what would prove to be the most important conversation of the investigation. Janet began the conversation by expressing hope that motherhood was everything I had dreamed it would be, speaking as if my career at Meridian was already a closed chapter. When I responded that I was looking forward to returning to work after my maternity leave ended, her demeanor shifted noticeably. She began speaking more carefully, as if each word carried potential consequences. The breakthrough came when I mentioned the upcoming Pentagon audit and my concern about security protocol compliance during my absence. Janet's response revealed everything Captain Williams needed to build her case. She assured me that everything was being handled properly, specifically mentioning that Derek was doing an excellent job managing security oversight, despite his limited experience. When I pressed for details about Derek's clearance status, Janet became defensive and evasive. She claimed that all personnel assignments were appropriate and that the Pentagon was completely satisfied with current security arrangements. But her body language suggested deep anxiety about the direction of our conversation. The decisive moment came when I mentioned that I had heard rumors about irregular clearance approvals and wanted to ensure that Meridian's reputation remained spotless. Janet's reaction was immediate and telling. She leaned forward aggressively, her voice taking on a threatening tone as she told me that spreading unfounded rumors could damage both my career prospects and the company's business relationships. Janet then made the crucial mistake that would ultimately destroy her. In her eagerness to shut down my concerns, she revealed detailed knowledge of the fraudulent clearance process and her coordination with family members to expedite approvals. She specifically mentioned her confidence that Pentagon auditors would not discover any irregularities because the documentation was too professional to raise suspicions. When I expressed continued concern about compliance issues, Janet's facade of pleasantness finally cracked completely. She told me bluntly that my maternity leave had shown everyone that I was no longer committed to the demanding requirements of defense work. The company had moved on without me, and I should do the same. The conversation reached its climax when Janet offered me a substantial severance package to resign quietly and never contact Pentagon officials about Meridian's operations. She described the package as generous compensation for my years of service, but her tone made clear it was actually a bribe to secure my silence about the fraud I had discovered. Janet's final mistake came when she became frustrated with my continued questions about security procedures. In an angry outburst, she revealed that she had been in regular communication with certain Pentagon officials who were willing to overlook minor irregularities in exchange for personal considerations. The admission of bribery and corruption of federal officials was the smoking gun that would ultimately bring down the entire conspiracy. As our conversation concluded, Janet must have realized she had revealed too much. Her final words carried an unmistakable threat warning me that pursuing unfounded allegations against the company would result in serious legal consequences for me personally. She suggested that new mothers who made trouble for their former employers often found themselves unemployable in the defense industry. I left Janet's office with my heart racing, but my mission accomplished. The recording device had captured detailed admissions of security clearance fraud, bribery of federal officials, and systematic violation of national security protocols. Janet had incriminated herself so thoroughly that prosecution would be inevitable once Captain Williams reviewed the evidence. As I walked past Derek in the hallway, his terrified expression confirmed that he understood his fraudulent clearance had been exposed. Grace caught my eye from across the office, and I nodded slightly to indicate that our plan had succeeded. Within hours, federal agents would be armed with irrefutable evidence of criminal conspiracy that threatened American national security. That evening, as I played the recording for Captain Williams and Amanda, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The hardest part of the investigation was over, but the real test would come when federal prosecutors decided whether to pursue the case aggressively. Janet's admission of bribing Pentagon officials, had elevated the charges to a level that could result in decades in federal prison, but it also meant we were taking on adversaries with significant political connections. As I tucked Sarah into her crib that night, I whispered a promise that her mother had done everything possible to protect the country she would grow up in. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the federal investigation moved into high gear, but tonight I could rest knowing that the truth had finally been captured and preserved for justice. Friday morning arrived with the controlled chaos of a federal law enforcement operation. Captain Williams had worked through the night coordinating with FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and Pentagon security officials to prepare simultaneous raids that would prevent evidence destruction and witness intimidation. At exactly 6 a.m, while I watched from across the street with Sarah in her stroller, federal agents surrounded Meridian Defense Solutions. The sight was both terrifying and exhilarating. FBI agents in windbreakers moved with military precision, securing all entrances and exits before entering the building with search warrants that covered every computer filing cabinet and storage device on the premises. I could see employees gathering at windows, clearly confused and frightened by the sudden federal presence in their workplace. Janet arrived at her usual time, apparently unaware of the investigation until she encountered federal agents in the lobby. Even from my distant vantage point, I could see her shock and panic as she realized her carefully constructed fraud had been exposed. 2 agents escorted her directly to a waiting vehicle reading her rights as she struggled to understand how her world had collapsed overnight. Derek Palmer was arrested at his apartment that same morning, caught attempting to shred documents that detailed his fraudulent clearance application. Brad Walsh was taken into custody at the Human Resources Conference in downtown Washington, his arrest creating a scene that would be reported in industry publications within hours. Grace Thompson became the hero of the day, providing federal agents with detailed guidance about where to find the most incriminating evidence. Her months of careful documentation had created a roadmap that led investigators directly to the smoking guns they needed for ironclad prosecutions. When I spoke with her that evening, she expressed overwhelming relief that the nightmare was finally ending. Captain Williams called me that afternoon with preliminary results from the raids. Federal agents had seized over 50 boxes of documents, dozens of computer hard drives, and hundreds of hours of recorded conversations that Grace had secretly preserved. The evidence was so comprehensive that Janet's defense attorneys would have little room to negotiate plea bargains. But the investigation had also uncovered connections that expanded the case far beyond Meridian Defense Solutions. Financial records revealed payments to Robert Morrison's fake investigation company from 6 other defense contractors, suggesting a massive network of clearance fraud across the industry. The Pentagon immediately suspended over $3 billion in active contracts pending security reviews. The media attention began that same evening with local news stations reporting federal raids at a major defense contractor. By the weekend, national publications were describing the case as one of the largest security clearance fraud schemes in American history. My role as the whistleblower who exposed the conspiracy became public knowledge, bringing both praise and scrutiny from across the country. Monday brought congressional attention as representatives demanded immediate hearings about security clearance oversight and contractor fraud prevention. Senator Patricia Martinez, chairwoman of the Senate Defense Subcommittee, announced comprehensive legislation to strengthen background investigation procedures and increase penalties for clearance fraud. Derek Palmer's cooperation with federal investigators provided crucial details about the family conspiracy that had operated the fraud scheme. Facing potential decades in prison, he revealed that Janet had recruited him specifically to replace me, promising rapid career advancement in exchange for his willingness to work with falsified credentials. His testimony would prove essential in documenting the systematic nature of the conspiracy. The Pentagon's immediate response exceeded even Captain Williams's expectations. Within a week, Inspector General investigators had identified security violations at 12 different defense contractors, leading to emergency contract suspensions worth over $600 million. The scope of the compromised projects included some of the military's most sensitive weapons systems and communication networks. Lisa Rodriguez found herself vindicated beyond her wildest hopes. The new Meridian management team installed after Janet's arrest offered her a senior security position with full compensation for the wrongful termination she had suffered. More importantly, her courage in preserving evidence and coming forward had helped prevent compromised defense systems from endangering American military personnel. My own vindication came in multiple forms. The Department of Labor opened an immediate investigation into Meridian's violation of Family and Medical Leave Act protections, ultimately levying substantial fines and requiring comprehensive policy changes. The Pentagon Inspector General's office offered me a senior position overseeing contractor security compliance with a salary that reflected the critical importance of preventing future fraud. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the discovery of just how much money Janet's conspiracy had cost her own company. Federal prosecutors calculated that Meridian would face over $400 million in fines, penalties, and contract cancellations as a direct result of the fraud. The company's stock price collapsed, and several board members resigned in disgrace. The legal proceedings moved with unusual speed for federal court. Janet's recorded admissions of fraud and bribery made plea negotiations impossible, and her attorneys focused on minimizing her sentence rather than challenging the evidence. Robert Morrison's fake investigation company was shut down permanently with all its assets seized to compensate the federal government for fraudulent billing. Congressional hearings provided a national platform for discussing the broader implications of the case. I testified before the House Defense Appropriations Committee about how systematic fraud threatened both national security and the rights of working mothers in the defense industry. The hearing received widespread media coverage and led to bipartisan legislation strengthening whistleblower protections. Captain Williams kept me informed as the investigation expanded internationally. Intelligence agencies discovered that foreign adversaries had indeed identified and exploited the security vulnerabilities created by fraudulent clearances. Several classified projects had been compromised, requiring expensive redesigns and enhanced security measures that would cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of additional dollars. The human cost of Janet's conspiracy extended far beyond financial fraud. Military intelligence officers briefed me on potential operational security compromises that could have endangered American personnel in overseas deployments. Knowing that my decision to come forward had prevented such casualties gave me deep satisfaction despite the personal costs of fighting the conspiracy. Grace Thompson's transformation was remarkable to witness. From a frightened assistant afraid to challenge her powerful supervisor, she became a nationally recognized expert on corporate fraud prevention. She accepted a position with the Government Accountability Office, where her experience would help identify and prevent similar conspiracies in other industries. As the criminal cases moved toward sentencing, federal prosecutors revealed the full scope of the conspiracy's impact. Janet's scheme had defrauded the government of over $200 million in fraudulent billing while compromising classified projects worth more than $600 million in total contract value. The systematic nature of the fraud had required complete security reviews of dozens of ongoing defense projects. The ripple effects extended throughout the defense contracting industry as companies scrambled to verify the legitimacy of their own security clearances. The Pentagon implemented new oversight procedures that would make similar fraud much more difficult to execute, but the immediate cost of enhanced verification systems exceeded $100 million. My testimony at Janet's sentencing hearing provided an opportunity to address the court about the broader implications of her crimes. I spoke about the violation of trust that occurred when someone sworn to protect national security instead sold it for personal profit. I also emphasized how her systematic targeting of women on maternity leave had violated both federal law and basic human decency. The sentences handed down reflected the serious nature of the crimes and their impact on national security. Janet received 12 years in federal prison, while Robert Morrison got 8 years for his role in creating fraudulent background investigations. Derek Palmer's cooperation earned him a reduced sentence of 2 years probation and community service, but his security clearance was permanently revoked. Brad Walsh's conviction for violating family leave protections and conspiracy to commit fraud resulted in a 4-year sentence that sent a clear message to other employers who might consider retaliating against women taking protected leave. His conviction was particularly significant because it established legal precedent for prosecuting systematic discrimination disguised as routine personnel decisions. The financial penalties imposed on Meridian Defense Solutions exceeded all previous contractor fraud cases. In addition to criminal fines, the company faced civil penalties and permanent exclusion from federal contracts. The total cost to the company exceeded $600 million, leading to bankruptcy and dissolution within 18 months of the initial raids. As I reflected on the year-long legal process that had transformed my life, I felt profound satisfaction that justice had been served comprehensively. The criminals who had threatened national security and violated federal labor laws faced serious consequences. The victims of their fraud had been vindicated and compensated. Most importantly, the security vulnerabilities that could have endangered American lives had been identified and corrected. 1 year after that first panicked phone call from my former workplace, I sat in my new office at the Pentagon Inspector General headquarters, watching Sarah take her first tentative steps across the carpeted floor. The symbolism was not lost on me. Both of us were learning to walk in a world that had been fundamentally changed by our shared journey through crisis and vindication. My new position as Senior Security Compliance Officer carried responsibilities that extended far beyond anything I had imagined when I first entered the defense contracting field. Working directly for Captain Williams, I now oversee security clearance verification for all major defense contracts, ensuring that the systematic fraud we exposed could never happen again. The work is demanding but deeply satisfying, knowing that every fraudulent clearance we catch prevents potential compromise of American military operations. The whistleblower reward from the federal government provided financial security that allowed Mark and me to purchase our dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood with excellent schools. Sarah would grow up in a place where she could ride bicycles safely and attend community events where neighbors knew each other's names. The money also established her college fund, ensuring that her education would never be limited by our family's financial circumstances. But the most meaningful transformation was not financial, but personal. Grace Thompson had become not just a colleague, but one of my closest friends, serving as Sarah's godmother and providing the kind of deep friendship that emerges from shared trials. Her own journey from frightened assistant to nationally recognized fraud prevention expert inspired me daily to use my position for positive change. Lisa Rodriguez's new security consulting firm had grown rapidly as defense contractors sought expertise in preventing the kind of fraud that had destroyed Meridian. Her business specialized in protecting whistleblowers and implementing compliance systems that encouraged reporting of irregularities before they became criminal conspiracies. She frequently invited me to speak at industry conferences about the importance of creating safe channels for employees to report concerns. The congressional legislation that emerged from our case had fundamentally changed how security clearances are verified and maintained. The Clearance Integrity Act required multiple independent verifications of all background investigations, making it virtually impossible for family members to create fake clearance mills like Janet's conspiracy. The law also strengthened penalties for retaliation against employees who report security violations. Derek Palmer's transformation was perhaps the most surprising aspect of the entire case. His cooperation with federal investigators had led to a career in compliance consulting, where his first-hand experience with fraud made him uniquely qualified to help companies avoid similar violations. He often expressed gratitude that our investigation had prevented him from deepening his involvement in criminal activity. The broader impact of exposing Janet's conspiracy continued to ripple through the defense industry years later. Over 50 companies had voluntarily disclosed clearance irregularities to avoid the kind of federal investigation that destroyed Meridian. The Pentagon estimated that enhanced security verification procedures had prevented hundreds of potential compromises of classified information. My testimony before congressional committees had become the foundation for comprehensive reforms in how the government oversees contractor security practices. The new procedures required regular audits by independent investigators, random verification of clearance credentials, and mandatory reporting of any irregularities discovered during routine operations. But perhaps the most important change was cultural rather than regulatory. The defense industry had begun taking seriously the contributions of women and the importance of supporting employees who report wrongdoing. Several major contractors had created programs specifically designed to retain women through career transitions like marriage and motherhood. Sarah's first birthday party was attended by an unlikely collection of federal agents, attorneys, congressional staffers, and reformed criminals who had all played roles in our journey toward justice. Watching her blow out her single candle, I reflected on how much her presence had motivated every decision I made during the most difficult year of my life. The legal proceedings had finally concluded 6 months earlier with the last of Janet's co-conspirators accepting plea agreements. The total recovery for the federal government exceeded $400 million, making our case one of the most financially successful whistleblower actions in history. But the true value lay in the security improvements that would protect American interests for decades to come. Captain Williams often reminded me that individual courage in the face of institutional corruption was the foundation of democratic accountability. Without citizens willing to risk their personal security to protect national interests, criminal conspiracies would flourish unchecked. My willingness to confront Janet's fraud had prevented much larger security compromises that could have endangered American lives. The speaking engagements that followed our case's resolution provided opportunities to encourage other potential whistleblowers facing similar dilemmas. I frequently emphasized that protecting the country's security systems was worth temporary personal sacrifice, and that federal law provided real protection for those brave enough to come forward with evidence of wrongdoing. Mark's support throughout the entire ordeal had strengthened our marriage in ways I had not anticipated. Facing crisis together had revealed depths of character in both of us that might never have emerged during routine daily life. His willingness to accept financial uncertainty while I fought for justice had demonstrated the kind of partnership that could weather any storm. Sarah's development during her first year seemed to reflect the transformation our family had undergone. She was an unusually alert and engaged baby, as if she had absorbed the intensity and purpose that surrounded her earliest months. Her pediatrician commented on her remarkable social awareness and confident interaction with the diverse group of people who frequented our home. The annual Pentagon Inspector General Conference, where I now speak regularly, had become a venue for discussing the ongoing challenges of maintaining security integrity in an era of sophisticated threats. My presentation about detecting and preventing systematic fraud was consistently rated among the most valuable sessions with attendees, praising its practical insights and inspirational message. As I looked toward the future, I saw opportunities to expand the impact of our successful case. The Inspector General's office had invited me to lead a new initiative focused on protecting national security whistleblowers and streamlining the process for reporting contractor fraud. The program would serve as a model for other agencies seeking to encourage accountability reporting. But my greatest satisfaction came from daily work that prevented other families from experiencing the betrayal and uncertainty we had endured. Every fraudulent clearance we identified represented a family that would not face the choice between personal security and national duty. Every company that improved its compliance practices meant fewer employees would suffer retaliation for doing the right thing. Sarah's bedtime stories often featured brave princesses who protected their kingdoms from hidden dangers, tales that reflected the real-world lesson that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose courage over comfort. I wanted her to grow up understanding that individual integrity was the foundation of collective security. The life lesson that emerged from our experience was profound and transformative. Standing up for what is right, even when it seems impossible, can protect not just yourself, but countless others who depend on the integrity of the systems we all share. I learned that maternal instincts to protect extend far beyond our own children to encompass the safety and security of the entire community. The courage required to confront institutional corruption came not from fearlessness, but from love. Love for my daughter, love for my country, and love for the principles that make democratic society possible. When we choose integrity over convenience, we create a world worthy of the next generation's inheritance. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. Janet's conspiracy cost me a job, but gave me a calling. Her betrayal ended my career in defense contracting, but began my life's work in protecting national security integrity. The crisis that threatened my family's stability ultimately provided the foundation for our most meaningful achievements. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between your personal security and doing what you knew was right? I believe we all encounter situations where our integrity is tested, whether at work in our communities or in our families. The courage to act on our principles, even when the cost seems overwhelming, is what creates positive change in the world. Sarah will inherit a country where people like you and me chose justice over comfort, truth over convenience, and courage over fear. What choice will you make when your moment comes? Thank you for sharing this journey with me. I hope our story inspires you to trust your instincts, protect what matters most, and remember that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary justice when they refuse to accept corruption as inevitable. Please like this video if our story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life accounts of courage and justice. Share this with someone who needs to hear that standing up for what's right is always worth the risk, and comment below about your own experiences with workplace integrity or family challenges. Your story might inspire others facing similar situations. May you find the courage to protect what you love, the strength to fight for what's right, and the wisdom to know that your individual choices can change the world for everyone who comes after you.